The night air was a brutal, bone-chilling presence over the rundown district in Detroit, a cold that bit through every layer, sinking deep into your very marrow. Steam billowed from a manhole cover near the old railroad tracks, twisting upwards like ghostly apparitions against a sky heavy with impending rain. The distant drone of the I-94 mingled with the clatter of metal from a nearby junkyard, a harsh symphony of urban decay. The aroma of diesel, rust, and overbrewed diner coffee hung heavy in the darkness. Streetlights flickered weakly, casting pathetic pools of orange light that barely held back the encroaching shadows. Underneath the viaduct, nestled against a concrete pillar adorned with faded graffiti tags, sat a small tent constructed from blue tarp and threadbare blankets. Inside that makeshift shelter lived Frank Miller, a 62-year-old man with hands weathered by decades of back-breaking labor. His grizzled beard was tangled and unkempt. Deep lines etched his face like a roadmap of hardship. Frank had spent 35 years working blue-collar jobs, until his back gave out, and the medical bills devoured every penny he'd ever saved. His wife lost her battle with cancer 2 winters ago, and the grief, coupled with mounting debt, had pushed him onto these unforgiving streets. But despite all that life had taken, Frank still carried a worn photograph of his late wife in his jacket pocket, and he still offered a prayer each night before drifting off, thanking God for another day, even if that day was spent hungry and alone. Now, before we get any further, if you believe in the power of kindness, the possibility of second chances, and standing up for what is right, be sure to hit that like button, leave a comment, share this video, and subscribe to our channel. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because stories like this serve as a powerful reminder that humanity still flickers in every corner of this world, even in the darkest places where most people prefer not to look. Across the street from the viaduct, the parking lot of an abandoned factory had become a temporary haven for the local Detroit Devils chapter. 80 motorcycles gleamed in neat rows, their chrome reflecting the weak streetlight like slumbering predators. The bikers had gathered that night for a memorial ride honoring a fallen brother, and they had stopped to share stories and coffee before heading home. Their leather vests bore the unmistakable red and white patches, and their very presence commanded respect from anyone who understood the weight of those colors. It was just past midnight when a beat-up pickup truck screeched to a halt near the viaduct. 3 young men piled out, their laughter piercing the quiet night like shattered glass. They were in their early 20s, decked out in expensive sneakers and name-brand hoodies that practically screamed money and privilege. Their ringleader, a tall, slender guy with slicked-back hair and a cruel smirk, pointed towards Frank's tent and said something that sent the others into fits of laughter. They'd clearly been drinking, their movements clumsy and emboldened by liquid courage. From across the street, Marcus Stone observed them intently. He was the Detroit Devils chapter president, a mountain of a man with arms like oak limbs and tattoos snaking up his neck like ivy. His leather vest was worn soft from years of riding, and his grizzled beard mirrored the cold steel in his eyes. Something about those young men made his gut clench. He recognized predators when he saw them. He knew the look. The tall one retrieved a gas can from the truck bed. Gasoline. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. They crept towards Frank's tent. Their cruel laughter reduced to snickers and whispers. The old man was asleep inside, dreaming of better days, utterly unaware that his humble sanctuary was about to become a death trap. The tall one began splashing gasoline around the base of the tent while his friends filmed with their phones, already envisioning the viral video they were about to unleash on the internet. Marcus was already in motion before his mind could fully process the situation. He let out a sharp, piercing whistle, and every single Detroit Devil in that parking lot snapped their heads around. No words were necessary. They had all seen enough. 80 men rose from their bikes and their conversations, moving as one towards the viaduct with the silent intensity of an approaching storm. The first splash of gasoline hit the tarp with a sickening thud. Frank stirred inside, confused by the strange, acrid smell invading his dreams. The second splash soaked the blankets near his feet. The tall one was reaching for his lighter when a massive hand clamped down on his shoulder, spinning him around with brutal force. Marcus Stone stood there, his face a mask of granite and his eyes blazing with a fury that made the young man stumble backward. Behind him, 80 Detroit Devils formed a wall of leather, chrome, and righteous indignation. "What in the hell do you think you're doing, Marcus growled, his voice like gravel grinding against steel. The young man stammered something about just having fun, about it being a harmless prank, about the homeless guy not even mattering anyway. His friends had dropped their phones and were scrambling back towards their truck, their bravado vanishing like morning mist under the relentless sun. Frank emerged from his tent, coughing from the fumes, his eyes wide with confusion and fear as he took in the scene before him. 3 terrified young men, surrounded by an army of the most intimidating bikers he had ever laid eyes on. Marcus knelt down beside Frank, his massive frame somehow becoming gentle and reassuring. "You okay, old-timer?" he asked, his voice softer than anyone would expect from a man of his stature. Frank nodded slowly, still struggling to comprehend what had just transpired, or how close he had come to burning alive in his sleep. Marcus stood and turned back to the young men. One of his brothers had already photographed their license plate. Another had confiscated their phones. The tall one was sobbing now, begging them not to hurt him, claiming his father was a lawyer and would sue them all. "Your father is a lawyer?" Marcus repeated, a chilling smile spreading across his face. "Good. He's going to need one. We've got everything on video. Attempted murder, arson, hate crime against a homeless individual. You boys are going to prison, and your fancy clothes aren't going to do you any good in there." The police arrived 20 minutes later, summoned by one of the bikers. The 3 young men were arrested on the spot, their futures crumbling like sandcastles before a hurricane. But for Marcus and his brothers, the night was far from over. They learned that Frank had been sleeping under that viaduct for 8 long months. They learned about his wife, about the crushing medical bills, about the blue-collar career that had built homes for others while leaving him with nothing but a broken back. They learned that he hadn't eaten a real meal in 3 days. That very night, the Detroit Devils took Frank to a 24-hour Coney Island and bought him the biggest breakfast on the menu. Eggs, bacon, pancakes, hash browns, coffee, and orange juice. He earned it. Frank Miller ate slowly, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, unable to remember the last time anyone had shown him kindness. But that was only the beginning. 3 days later, Frank was sleeping in a motel room that the Detroit Devils chapter had paid for, when a strange sound woke him up. It was a deep rumble, heavy, growing closer. He pulled back the curtain, and his breath caught in his throat. Motorcycles, dozens of them. Big Harleys lined the parking lot, engines idling, leather vests everywhere. The red and white Hells Angels patches blazed like flags in the morning sun. Marcus knocked on his door. "Frank," he rumbled, voice steady but serious. "You have been sleeping outside for too long. Our family does not forget people who have been wronged, and we do not abandon good men to the streets." Frank tried to speak, but his voice failed him. He thought they were going to hurt him. He thought maybe the young men's family had sent them, but the look in Marcus's eyes stopped him cold. It was not rage. It was compassion. Over the next 6 hours, the Detroit Devils transformed an abandoned storage unit owned by one of their members into a small apartment. One crew fixed the plumbing, while another installed insulation. Women from the club arrived with furniture, bedding, and kitchen supplies. Someone had found a small refrigerator. Another brought a television. Bags of groceries appeared, filled with bread, eggs, milk, vegetables, canned goods, and even a whole chicken. Frank stood in the middle of what was becoming his new home, tears streaming down his face as men with skull tattoos and leather cuts painted his walls and hung curtains. He tried to help, but they would not let him. "You have worked enough for one lifetime," one of them said, Let us handle this. When the work was done, Marcus pressed an envelope into Frank's trembling hands. Inside was enough money to cover 6 months of rent that the club had already negotiated with the property owner, a friend who owed them a favor. There was also a prepaid phone and a card with the chapter's number. Frank shook his head, overwhelmed. I cannot accept this. I cannot pay you back. I have nothing. Marcus gripped his shoulder firmly but gently. You already paid. Brother, you survived. You kept your dignity when the world tried to take everything from you. That is worth more than money. And from now on, if you ever need anything, you call that number. Day or night. You are family now. Frank broke down completely then, sobbing into his hands while 80 Hell's Angels stood around him in respectful silence. These men, who the world feared and judged, had given a forgotten old man something he thought he would never have again. A home, a family, hope. And before we end, we have one special request for you. Comment below with the words, "Justice found him," to show that you stand with Frank and believe that no one deserves to be forgotten. Because sometimes the people society writes off are the very ones who deserve our help the most. And sometimes the people society fears are the very ones who step up when no one else will. Remember, in a world where you can be anything, be someone who sees the invisible. Be someone who protects the vulnerable. Be someone who stands up when everyone else looks away.